All right, guys, hello to the next section of Chapter 3. This is the major components of an ecosystem, what it takes to make up an ecosystem. So let's see what we have today. Here's your gray box. The core ideas are to describe the trophic levels, those are the levels in the food pyramids, and how they can be represented in a conceptual model. That means the food pyramids. Okay, explain the roles of producers and consumers and decomposers in the ecosystem, especially decomposers. When you guys have taken this before in middle school or elementary school, you didn't pay as much attention to the decomposers as we are going to pay today. The third one says identify the different ways that energy and matter is transformed in the ecosystem, and then to summarize the processes of photosynthesis and cellular respiration. If your biology is anywhere near fresh on your mind, you're going to remember photosynthesis and respiration. All right, let's see. All right, so ecology, of course, is the branch that focuses on how organisms interact with one another in their physical environment. We learned that all the way back in lesson 1, okay? But it's how organisms interact, okay? That's part of the thing. So we use, we classify matter up into levels, going all the way from the tiniest little thing, atoms, all the way up to galaxies. We have divisions going, you can actually name them. My son and I have named them from atom to molecule all the way up to galaxies. Now the ecologists, though, are only going to study a certain portion of them. We're going to start around molecules and end at biosphere. Okay, there's no reason for us to go up to planet and solar system and beyond for there. So we're going to stick, for ecology, we're going to stick between the levels of molecule and biosphere. All right, and I've got an example of that right here for you. Okay, so we start with the atom, that's the smallest unit. And you'll need to make sure that you can do these in order, okay? You've done them in the past. So atom, and then molecule, and then cell, then organism, population, community, ecosystem, and biosphere, getting those levels all the way up like that, getting bigger and bigger as you go. So pay attention to this, spend a few minutes going through this and making sure that you understand the different levels. The main thing that tricks up a lot of people here is that community is only the living species interacting, trees, animals, birds. Ecosystem, you start adding in the non-living elements like water and temperature. Okay, so focus on learning those, okay, so that you understand the different levels and what they mean. So the overview, there's going to be 5 overview slides for this section. So we've already at the first one. So ecology, the organisms interact with each other. Ecosystems are composed of energy and chemical and organisms. Okay, and scientists classify the matter into levels from molecules up to galaxies, and ecologists study within these levels, as I said, from molecule to biosphere. All right, now here's the next main information slide. The biosphere and its ecosystems are made up of living, which is called biotic, and non-living, abiotic components. You've learned this in the past. So the examples of non-living components, we think of water and rocks and stuff, but think about all of these things. Okay, water, yes. Air, yes. Rocks, nutrients. That's part of our non-living environment. Thermal energy, the heat, and the sunlight, all of those are parts of our non-living environment. The living parts of our environment include the plants and the animals and the microbes and anything else that we might have left off the list. Okay, plants, animals, and microbe, all the living parts. And this example here, and I wish my picture wasn't in front of it, but this is a great example of a ecosystem, okay, where we have parts of the living and the non-living. And one of the things that we like to do is label which one of these are living and which one of these are non-living, biotic versus abiotic, and going through and you label each one. So I think we probably will do that at some point or another, where you take this diagram and you list which ones of these are biotic and which ones are abiotic. Now again, the biotic is living, abiotic non-living. What are the biotic components? Plants, animals, microbes, and anything else. I'll get to this in just a second. The abiotic are the air, the water, the rocks, the nutrients, thermal, light, energy. All right, so the trophic levels here, this part in the middle, these are the feeding levels, okay? Think of the food pyramids, okay? The trophic levels are the feeding levels, and it depends, the way we name the organisms first, it depends on whether they make their own food, we call those producers, or they find their food, we call those consumers. That's the first division. Then if it is a consumer After that, you divide it on its feeding behavior, meaning does it eat plants only, herbivore, carnivore, omnivore. Okay, so the first thing you divide is it a producer or a consumer? And then once that you've decided it is a consumer, you further divide that into what it eats, herbivore, carnivore, omnivore. And we're going to add another division as well, another label for that in just a minute. The ecologists are going to assign each organism to an ecosystem at a feeding level called a trophic level. The trophic level depends on whether it makes its food, it finds its food, and if it is finding its food, what that behavior is. And the organisms are classified producers or consumers, whether they find or consume their food. The producers are also called autotrophs. Plants, the producers, are also called autotrophs. So producers, like the plants, they make their food as they need from the compounds in the soil, the carbon dioxide in the air, and the water using the energy of the sunlight. You know the basics of how photosynthesis works, but do you realize that they are taking radiant energy and changing it into chemical energy? They are actually changing one type of energy into another type of energy, and that's pretty impressive. Okay, they're taking the energy of sunlight and turning it into chemical energy, glucose. So it's actually an energy change, and that may be a little bit more than you've given thought to but in the past. But that's not all. They're taking inorganic molecules and turning them organic. The inorganic molecules of light and carbon dioxide, okay, and water, all of those things are inorganic. And then they're changing them into organic glucose. So not only are they changing the energy source from radiant energy into chemical energy, they are changing it from inorganic to organic. That's a big deal. That's a really big deal. And of course, glucose is that organic molecule that we're talking about. If you've forgotten the formula, try to refresh yourself, you'll need it. C6H12O6. That's the chemical formula for glucose. And it's an energy-rich carbohydrate. I remember that when you were in biology class, you learned about the macromolecules, carbohydrates, fats, proteins, lipids. The glucose is a carbohydrate. It's an energy-rich carbohydrate. And the equation for photosynthesis, again, it's hidden behind my picture, but you know what it is. You have the carbon dioxide plus water plus light energy is going to yield glucose and oxygen. So it's 6 carbon dioxide specifically plus 6 waters plus the light energy is going to give you 1 glucose molecule and 6 oxygens. Okay. You learned it in the past. You'll still need it. Okay, now the different types of producers. We have producers on land, which are mostly the green plants and trees and grasses. Then producers in freshwater and ocean ecosystems near the shore. Okay, algae and aquatic plants living near the shore. And then out in the open ocean, the dominant producers are phytoplankton. Phyto for light, plankton, like SpongeBob's buddy. Okay, phytoplankton. Okay, they drift or float out in the open ocean. Okay, so on land, you have trees and grasses. Near the edges of freshwater or ocean ecosystems, you'll have algae or aquatic plants. And then out in the open ocean, you'll have phytoplankton. But these are all the different types of producers, and all 3 of these will do photosynthesis for us, okay, which in turn gives us our oxygen. The consumers are also called heterotrophs. Heterotrophs, that's what the consumers, their other name. So if they're not, if the other organisms that are not producers, they're going to be a consumer. The consumers are organisms that cannot produce their own food. And when I say they can't make their own food, I'm not talking you can't make a sandwich, because I know you can make a sandwich, but you can't stand in an open field with the sun hitting you and all of a sudden you're not hungry anymore. That kind of make your own food, and you know this. Okay, they get their food and energy that they need by feeding on producers or other consumers. Or they eat the waste and remains of the producers and consumers. So when we get to decomposers, and there's a new word you're going to get, detritivores, when we get to that in a minute, they're also a type of consumer, okay, because they're eating the waste or remains of other consumers. Now the primary consumers, that's the first ones. Hang on, the primary consumers, those are the herbivores. Okay, the primary consumers are herbivores. They're the ones that if the plants are on the bottom of the pyramid, these are the next level up. These are the primary consumers. These are the herbivores. They're the ones that eat the plants or the algae. And some examples, you got caterpillars, giraffes, elephants, tons of different things. But don't forget the the zooplankton. Did you see this? Zooplankton eats phytoplankton. Phyto comes from the word for photosynthesis. These are the little planktons that will do photosynthesis. Zooplankton, that comes from the name for animals. Zoo. Okay, so these are the animal type plankton. They eat the phytoplankton. Okay, they're also microscopic. All right. So remember to consider those kind of things when you're doing food webs and food chains. Okay, phytoplankton eating zooplankton, and then the smaller fish will eat the zooplankton, and then something bigger and something bigger. All right, so the next level up is our secondary consumers. All right, and we have those. I'm going to make sure my pen's writing. Okay, this is the secondary consumers. So a minute ago we just did the primary consumers. Those are our herbivores. Next level up, those are secondary consumers, and then the next is tertiary. You can get even higher, and that would be quaternary, and in some ecosystems you can get all the way up to quintenary. That's 5. All right, the ecosystems that are most abundant are the ones where you're most likely to get up to 5 steps. Okay, the really small, pindly, low-end ecosystems you can get to tertiary. Okay, primary is those are the herbivores, those are the ones eating the producers. Then you have secondary that eat them, and then you have tertiary. Most ecosystems you can get to quaternary, and some you can even get to quintenary. Okay, but they're feeding on the ones below. Now, among the secondary, tertiary, and quaternary groups, if you have them, you're going to get carnivores and omnivores. Okay, because these are the ones that are eating the meat. We're done with the plant eaters. We might have some that in some instances, like the omnivores especially, in some instances they can serve as an herbivore, which is our primary consumer, but in some other instances they would serve as a secondary or tertiary. So it depends, especially with the omnivores, they can switch places because they switch their meals. But for the carnivores are going to feed mostly on the the other animals. And some of the carnivores, the small ones like lions, well, it's not necessarily lions, but some of the carnivores, spiders, lion, and small fishes will be secondary consumers depending on how their food web goes. Others like tigers and hawks and orcas are going to be tertiary or quaternary. So again, it depends on what you've had for lunch that day. Almost any organism can be on almost any level. Okay, depends on how you work, who's eating what for lunch. The omnivores, like pigs, rats, and humans, isn't it nice to be in that category? Pigs, rats, and humans. All right, we eat both plants and animals. And like the carnivores, the omnivores can be secondary, tertiary, or quaternary, depending on what you've had for lunch that day. So all you have to do is the primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary, that depends on what you've had for lunch that day. But as far as are you a carnivore, you're always a carnivore. Are you an herbivore? You're always an herbivore. Okay. Are you an omnivore? Yes, you're an omnivore. That doesn't change. But the primary, secondary, tertiary can change based on what you've had for lunch that day and what everybody else has had for lunch that day. So the producers are going to use the photosynthesis to make their nutrients. Okay, there's the six CO2s, 6 H2Os plus the light energy. All right, is going to give you glucose and oxygen. So consumers feed on other organisms for their remains to get their energy. So the plants are actually feeding on carbon dioxide and water and sunlight to get their energy. They're making it themselves. The herbivores, the plant eaters, carnivores, meat eaters, omnivores, both. The primary consumers eat green plants or algae. The secondaries eat the primaries. And the tertiary or higher will eat both or all three. Decomposers are next, and I told you with our decomposers we're going to get a little more deep than you might have in the past. The decomposers are the ones that get their nutrients by breaking down or decomposing the non-living matter, like leaf litter or fallen trees or dead animals. So they're going to break it down and get the nutrients out of it. In the process of attaining their own food, they release the nutrients from the waste and the remains of the plants animals. So this is the important part that makes them a decomposer, this releasing of the nutrients. Okay, that's the important part. Okay, so they're going to release the nutrients, and in the process of decomposition, those nutrients are now available to the next generations in the ecosystem. So once the decomposers have done their job, the nutrients are available to the rest. The main decomposers, though, are bacteria and fungi. Okay, I know my picture's in front of that, but it's the bacteria and fungus that are the main decomposers. Now, what may be confusing to you and what is going to be helpful is that this new term detritivores or detritus feeders, they get the nourishment by consuming detritus or freshly dead organisms. You know when you talk about scavengers, right? You know that the scavengers aren't necessarily decomposers, right? They're eating the dead stuff, but they're not breaking it down. I mean, the plant can't grow right after a hyena. So the detritus feeders, this is where you get the earthworms, the insects, the hyenas, and the vultures. This is where you'll get your scavengers. Okay, they're the detritus feeders. The decomposers are the ones that actually break down the matter so that the next generation can use it. The detritus feeders are just eating it. Okay. And so in natural ecosystems, the decomposers and detritivores are going to eliminate the buildup of leaf litter, animal waste, and dead animals and plants, because you imagine what it would be like around here without them. And in doing so, though, they are the key to nutrient cycling. We know, remember we talked about how the earth is a closed system as far as matter and energy goes, matter and nutrients goes. Remember we've said we can't just stop off at the asteroid belt to get more carbon. We can't stop off and get more nitrogen. This is all we have. Well, it's the decomposers and detritivores who make it possible for us to continue. They're the ones who are doing the recycling for us. So the detritivores and decomposers are our key to nutrient cycling. For example, if the decomposers and detritivores are starting on a fallen tree, say a tree falls in the forest, they're going to change that into wood particles and then finally back into the simple inorganic molecules. So we said that it was quite impressive that the plants can take inorganic, sunlight and water, and turn it into organic glucose. The decomposers and detritivores, they're able to do the opposite. They can take living matter and turn it back into inorganic. They can take organic, biotic material and turn it back into abiotic material. Okay, the oxygen, the nitrogen, okay, that's not living. Nitrogen molecules, nope. But the cells of this tree were living, so the decomposers and detritivores are able to do the opposite step. The plants will take abiotic material, sunlight, water, carbon dioxide, and turn it into the biotic material, glucose. The decomposers and detritivores will take the biotic material and turn it back into abiotic so that we can have the cycling. And again, this way we have these nutrients continually recycled, because this is spaceship Earth. We don't have anywhere to stop to get extras. This is a great picture here that shows us what's happening. The time is moving this way. Okay, this is when the tree first falls, and over here is when it's been down for a long time. So we start off with these bigger beetles. Okay, these are basically detritivores. Okay, you don't get to the decomposers till you're down here. Okay, these are your decomposers. These are the ones who are turning the nutrients back, the dead material back into inorganic nutrients. These guys are just further breaking it up. They're breaking it up, and these guys are eating the waste that remains after that. So here's our overview for this section. The decomposers, they get their nutrients by breaking down or decomposing the non-living matter, and the leaf litter, fallen trees, dead animals. The detritivores get their nourishment by feeding on the freshly dead organisms. I keep thinking zombie, it's so crazy. The detritivores get their nourishment by feeding on the freshly dead before they're fully decomposed. And both of them work together for the nutrient cycling. Now, cellular respiration is, of course, the opposite of photosynthesis. The organisms are going to use the chemical energy that's stored in the glucose and sometimes other compounds to fuel the life processes. So this is where we take the glucose that the plants made for us. We use that glucose to run our bodies. Okay, but here's the thing. Did the plants make the glucose just for us? They made it for themselves. The plants also will use that glucose. So the plants will do photosynthesis, but they also do respiration. They do both. Okay, we only do respiration. We can only do, so that's why we steal the plants. Okay, we steal the glucose that the plants made. But the plants didn't make it for us, they made it for themselves. So the plants do both, photosynthesis and respiration. Okay, we only do respiration, so we have to steal the glucose from the plants. Now, so we use that for our life processes. And so in most cells, this is the energy is released by aerobic respiration. Aerobic, you remember from biology class, uses oxygen. And then the oxygen and glucose to make the energy. And then the byproducts is the carbon dioxide and water vapor. And here's our formula for aerobic respiration. You start with your glucose, C6H12O6. You add 6 oxygen to it. That's why we breathe. That's why you breathe oxygen, so that you can use it right here in this formula. Okay? That's why. This is the whole reason you breathe oxygen, so that you can have it for this formula right here. So, we take the oxygen, the glucose from the food we eat. Not there, I circled the wrong thing. Right here, this one. The oxygen, sorry. So, you take the glucose from the food you eat, the oxygen when you inhale. You do your chemical reactions to it. You breathe off carbon dioxide and you breathe off water vapor. The whole reason you did the reaction was to get this energy, okay, that you want to live off of. And do you remember what the energy is called? It's not part of our lesson necessarily, but you need to know. The energy is called ATP. Do you remember that from biology class? ATP, that's the kind of energy that we get when we do cellular respiration. Now again, as I said a second ago, that photosynthesis and cellular respiration are pretty much opposite from one another. The detailed steps are slightly different, okay, but the chemical change from aerobic respiration is completely opposite for photosynthesis. The reactants for one are the products of the other, and the products of this one are the reactants of the other, so they switch, okay? So I have it broken down for you. Right here, the photosynthesis and cellular respiration are opposite processes. The energy flows in opposite directions. Photosynthesis deposits energy, meaning it takes the sunlight and holds it up, locks it up in chemical. And cellular respiration gets it out of the chemical energy and withdraws it to turn it into energy. Okay, chemical energy. Okay, so, well, they take the chemical energy that's stored in glucose and they use it for the actual kinetic energy of running our body. The reactants of cellular respiration are the products of photosynthesis, like I told you there. And then, again, the reactants of photosynthesis are the products of cellular respiration. They just switch, just completely pop one for the other. Just completely pop back and forth. And then, as the cells respire, yeah, when you do respiration, it's called, if someone is doing respiration, they respire. It looks like a weird word, but that's what it means. They're doing respiration. The reaction also produces some thermal energy. You know we create heat when we digest our food, okay? This is why we have body heat. So some of it is lost to the environment as heat. Now, that was what I was just talking about, was aerobic respiration. You remember from biology class, anaerobic, that means without, okay, without oxygen, okay? So we have some decomposers like yeast and some bacteria. They do it this way on purpose. They get the energy they need by breaking down glucose and some other stuff in the absence of oxygen. Okay, they do it. We only do anaerobic respiration when we have to. Okay, when our muscles get taxed. Okay, when we've stressed out our muscles too bad, we'll do anaerobic respiration. But the yeast and some of the bacteria, they do it that way on purpose. So this is called anaerobic respiration. Ana means without. Anaerobic respiration. It's also called fermentation. Okay, when you're making cheeses or wines, okay, or ale or whatever it is you're making, they call that fermentation because that is anaerobic respiration happening. So instead of carbon dioxide and water, which is pretty much perfectly harmless in the body, well, carbon dioxide isn't, we know better than that, but the normal aerobic respiration just releases carbon dioxide and water. When you're doing anaerobic respiration, you get different stuff. You don't just get carbon dioxide and water. You're going to get weird stuff like methane gas, okay, which is what the natural gas is from, or you're going to get ethyl alcohol, okay, or acetic acid, which is what's in vinegar, or hydrogen sulfide, which is that rotten egg smell. So if you're doing fermentation, okay, or anaerobic respiration, which is also called fermentation, you're not going to just get carbon dioxide and water. You're going to get some weird stuff, okay, methane, acetic acid, hydrogen sulfide. Or if you're human, you'll get lactic acid. Okay, this is what we get when we do fermentation. Okay, where's my pencil? There it is. Lactic acid. And that's the thing that makes your muscles sore the next day. If you've done, now think about it, if you're having a workout and you're able to breathe like you're supposed to during a workout, then the next day you'll feel just fine, okay? But if you push yourself too hard, or the coach pushes you, whichever the case may be, and you keep working and working, even though you know you should stop, you're breathing heavy because you're out of oxygen, okay? But you're not allowed to stop. Either you ticked off the coach, or worse, there may be a dog chasing you and you're not allowed to stop. Whatever the case may be, you are not stopping. So you're going to start to do some anaerobic respiration because you ran out of oxygen. If you have enough oxygen, you'll do aerobic. You run out, you do anaerobic. If you're doing anaerobic, instead of putting out plain old carbon dioxide and water that's not going to hurt anybody, you're going to make lactic acid instead, and that's what does hurt. Okay? But this next part here, all of the organisms, leaving out of anaerobic respiration, back to respiration now, all organisms, including the producers, the plants, get their energy from aerobic or anaerobic respiration, one or the other, okay? But that means including plants. Like I said, the plants didn't make that glucose for us. They made it for themselves. So the plants make the glucose for themselves to use. They do photosynthesis so they can do respiration. We only do respiration. That's why we have to steal it from them, okay? We only do respiration, but the plants do both. Okay. Only the producers can do photosynthesis. That's why we have to steal it. Well, it's not steal it. That's just why we have to eat. Here's our overview slide. Okay, cellular respiration is the release of chemical energy that's stored in the glucose and other organic compounds. Aerobic respiration uses oxygen and glucose, and it's the opposite of photosynthesis. I have you another copy of that opposite slide going on right here. Okay, so pay attention to that if you're not quite understanding what I'm meaning about it being opposite. And so here's the formula again for respiration. You'll have to memorize it just like if you memorize photosynthesis. Technically though, if you're smart about it, you memorize photosynthesis and you know respiration is just backwards. You just flip the reactants and the products. You just memorize one of them and flip it for the other. The anaerobic one is the one that we do in absence of oxygen. Its other name is fermentation. So make sure you know anaerobic and fermentation. And the byproducts on this are that weird stuff, methane, ethyl alcohol, hydrogen sulfide. You're not just going to get the real one. And of course, if you're human, what do you get? Lactic acid. Okay, if you're a human and you're doing fermentation, or even an animal of any type, if you're an animal and you're doing fermentation, you'll get lactic acid. All right, so to summarize, to bring this on up, the ecosystems and the biosphere are sustained by the one-way energy flow of sunlight coming in. Okay, sunlight coming in and getting this whole thing started. And once we have this started, the producers are making it, the consumers are eating it, the decomposers are breaking it down. Okay, but it is the sunlight coming in kicks off this whole thing for us. The cycling of matter and energy through the ecosystems starts off with the sunshine, the one-way input of sunlight. Okay, so that's how this thing works. So let me know if you have any questions, and we will see you for the next one. Bye, everybody.